Hello, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. And as you can see right there on your screen, we are back-to-back Dog National Champions. Go for 2 in 22. That was the mission. That mission was accomplished. Now you set your sights on maybe a third straight national championship here in 2023 for these Dogs. And what a fun conversation that is to have. And speaking of fun conversations, we're going to have a good one for you here today. It's Jeff Sentell. Later on, we'll talk some UGA recruiting with him. We're going to laugh at Florida for kind of a weird reason today, but I think you will like this here coming up in just a little bit. That will be good. The Dogs showed up in kind of a sort of a cultural, iconic type place yesterday. That's probably worth giving a little bit of a mention to. We'll do that. But off the top, I think there's a debate that has been simmering now for a while, probably getting a little hotter here at the moment. And I think it's time now to sort of stand up and say Kirby Smart has emerged as college football's best coach. And that means you know who is now number 2. So we will have that here off the top. We'll lay out our case for it and let you decide what it all means. It's a fun Friday, kind of rainy, but nonetheless, we're going to get through it. Glad to have you with us as we do. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I really love this time of year, the kind of time of year where we're still in the off season of college football. Now, of course, as a college football show, we love the college football season. And it seems like what counts as the college football season sort of stretches longer and longer and longer, especially when you're go for 2 in 22 and winning back-to-back national championships. The season has a way of stretching till darn near February. We understand all of that. But there is still a portion of the season that sort of feels like the off-season. And I love the off-season part of college football because, to me, there is a lot of energy around the kind of debates and the discussions that college football fans willingly enter into. For whatever reason, I don't know why this is, college football's always been a sport that lends itself to great debates, great arguments. And you know, sometimes you think, well, there's too much arguing on the internet, and maybe there is. But in the case of like the college football arguments, I think for the most part they're pretty fun. Now, some people maybe take it too far or whatever else, but I would say that's a small portion of people. For the most part, college football fans, us representing Georgia, people representing the other schools, whatever else, this is just one of those things we sort of do for sport. College football is a sport, but we kind of make the sport of arguing about college football our own sport in a lot of ways, and I just love doing a show like this where we get a chance to be a part of it. I'm thankful that you all allow us to kind of, be in this discussion with you, and I'm here for it all. That means that there are a few things this time of year that kind of get entered into the fray that I welcome wholeheartedly, even though if we were kind of step back and say, well, does this really mean anything? It probably doesn't, but whatever gives us an sort of an entry ramp to having a argument, having a college football discussion, whatever that is, well, that's probably valuable because we just love the college football arguments and the discussion we get to have so much. So around this time of year, there is kind of a thing that always seems to happen that creates one of those great college football discussions I love. The various media entities will start ranking their top college football coaches. And I'm going to cite 3 different ones today. There's a couple of dudes from The Athletic, one dude named Bruce Feldman, one dude named Stuart Mandel. There's Brad Crawford from 24/7 Sports. Eventually, we'll hear from the Sporting News and CBS and a lot of these other media outlets. But the kind of early entrances into the debate about who are the top coaches in college football, a couple guys from The Athletic, one guy from 24/7 Sports. And in looking at all of this, what you see is Kirby Smart trying to now climb the ranks of college football's top coaches. Let's keep in mind here, Kirby Smart is still a very young coach. He's only been a head coach since the start of the 2016 season. You can make a case that he may not even quite yet be in his coaching prime, which is a weird thing to say given the fact they've won back-to-back national championships. But look at how long the typical coach is able to coach. Kirby Smart's not even to kind of the halfway point of that yet. This is still a pretty young coach. So over the course of the last few years, great success early in his coaching life, winning the SEC and making the college football playoff in just a second year on the job. We saw Kirby start to climb these ranks pretty quickly, but within the last couple of years, there's also been this belief that while Kirby's one of the top coaches in college football, there was still this little bit of divide between Kirby and other guys ahead of him, even though some of the guys ahead of him are guys that Kirby had beaten head-to-head. In fact, it was prior to the start of the 2021 season, we brought on Bill Bender. Bill's a writer for the Sporting News. The Sporting News is like, I don't know, it's been in business for 600 years, I guess. But it's like one of those old schools, long-time media entities. They rank top coaches. Bill Bender's the guy that's responsible for doing that. And prior to the start of the 2021 season, believe it or not, Kirby Smart, this is hard to remember, this is only 2 years ago. It seems like 6 decades ago, but it was just 2 years ago that Kirby Smart was just the number 7 coach on the Sporting News list of college football's top coaches. Just 2 seasons ago, Kirby was just number 7. Now, at the time, that still seemed a little bit too low. Guys like Brian Kelly and Jimbo Fisher, Dabo Swinney, were ahead, Lincoln Riley, they were ahead of Kirby Smart at the time. We sort of brought on Bill. Now, we like Bill. Bill's a good writer. But we kind of brought him on the show and kind of put him in the interrogation chair as to, offer some sort of explanation. How come y'all had Kirby Smart so low? And Bill Bender was good enough to play along with this. To set us up for where we need to go today, here is Bender 2 years ago explaining why Kirby was just number 7 on the top coaches list.
That's fair, yeah, and that's the first thing I told our staff. I said they're going to bring up the 2 Notre Dame games with BK. With Kelly, Kelly's been to the playoffs twice and had 2 undefeated seasons. They played 2 close games, but Kirby won them. I think, Oklahoma's a tough one because Oklahoma in their conference, they've won their conference every year under Lincoln Riley. They're producing Heisman candidates at quarterback every single season. And Georgia, we always talk about, is this the right quarterback for Georgia? I think that's a big difference. Kirby's recruiting at an elite level. He's won big. I think the biggest thing with his ranking is the next part is, how do you get into that number 3 spot? You got to win one. And Jimbo's won one.
So, that entire clip right there sounds like something that should be saved in the National Archives. I'm telling you, it was only 2 years ago, y'all. It's just 2 years ago. But Brian Kelly was still at Notre Dame. Lincoln Riley was still at Oklahoma. Dabo Swinney was still thought to be a great coach. Like so many things that are not really seemingly true anymore, or in some cases just factually not true anymore, have changed so much over the course of the last couple of years. And at that particular time, you got Bill Bennett from the Sporting News debating about whether or not Kirby Smart could get to the number 3 spot. How do you move ahead of a guy like Jimbo Fisher, who's not even on the list anymore, I don't think. But, how do you even get to the point where Jimbo Fisher is? Because obviously Jimbo Fisher had won a national championship at Florida State going back to 2013. Now, here is the other thing you hear here, and I like Bill Bender fine. This is not a criticism of Bill Bender. But you sort of hear the label that was given to Kirby Smart in terms of trying to figure out how good of a coach he is. The label that's given to Kirby Smart is, hey, he's a great recruiter. You can't take that away from him. Great recruiter. You can't take that away from him. In other words, he may not be as smart as Lincoln Riley is. He may not be as smart as Brian Kelly is. He may not be as smart as some of these other guys are, but he is a great recruiter. And one way or another, we sort of know this was the kind of backhanded compliment that had been given to Kirby Smart plenty, that, he gets you talent, but what does he do with it when he gets there? That's the kind of thing that was out there. And there were even some people who were willing to even articulate this in more stark terms, I guess, including around this same time, a couple of years ago, Paul Finebaum. He does a weekly appearance on a radio station in Birmingham called WJOX, and he was on there. And he was talking about Kirby Smart leading into that 2021 season, the one that some people had kind of sort of mentioned as a, well, if he ain't going to win it now, when is he going to do it? The idea of, Kirby Smart needing to win that national championship in 2021. Paul Finebaum said it out loud that apparently at the time there were some people who just weren't quite so sure how good of a coach Kirby Smart was. Leader of a program, recruiter, he was fine with that. But making decisions during a game, how good of an on-field coach exactly was Kirby Smart? With his, as recently as 2 years ago, that was the discussion being had around Kirby. Here's evidence from Paul Finebaum.
In spite of this chatter out there about Kirby Smart, and I've heard it and you've heard it, Danny Sheridan was on our show the other day, and he picked Georgia to make the Final Four. But he said if they don't make it this year, when will they make it? I still think the overall record there is exemplary. Kirby Smart just needs to quiet down that conversation out there that he can't. That he's not a great on-the-field coach, and whether he is or isn't, it will continue to be debated. But I think his record is pretty good.
So that's Paul Finebaum saying, hey, Kirby Smart's got to quiet down the debate that he's not a good on-field coach. Nobody disputes how good of a recruiter he is, but the question is, does he make the right decisions during games? Now, to be fair here for a moment, part of the reason why this narrative of Kirby survived as long as it did, the notion that he was a better recruiter than he was in-game coach, is because Smart himself, given a million chances to defend his coaching skills, has almost always chosen not to do that. And Smart has almost always chosen to put the spotlight on his players when it comes to the success that Georgia's enjoyed. You know, he's had the chance to say, some of y'all think I can't coach, but we won a few games around here. Maybe I'm a better coach than you realize. But he's never done that, seemingly that I can recall, to defend himself. He has reinforced over and over again the role that recruiting plays in all of this. Of the people who kind of lead with the notion that Smart's a great recruiter, part of the reason why they do that is because Smart himself has always articulated that point so loudly. In fact, let's go back to the Florida game 2021, basically kind of laying out that I don't care how smart of a coach you are, a smart coach is not going to overcome bad recruiting. This is kind of the statement that might have gotten Dan Mullen fired, but it fits into the discussion we're having here right now. But the fact that Smart never shied away from the role that his recruiting success has played in his overall coaching success. Smart from October of 2021.
Well, you have to. I mean, guys, if you don't recruit, there's no coach out there that can out-coach recruiting. Okay, I don't care who you are. The best coach to ever play the game better be a good recruiter, because no coaching is going to out-coach players. I mean, anybody will tell you our defense is good because we got good players. So spending time on the phone, spending time with people at your house, spending time with people when they come to your campus. I'm not with my family when I'm doing that. My family sacrifices so that I can go and spend time with other people's families so that we have good players. So, that's 25% evaluation. That's 50% recruiting. And another 25% is going to be coaching. But if you don't recruit, guys, you got no chance. Just go look. Look at the best teams out there. They got good football players. And that's the reason I believe in recruiting. And I believe you better always be recruiting. Always be recruiting. Because if you're not, somebody else is.
So that little walk down memory lane there is all to sort of set up one point. That it wasn't all that long ago, just a couple of seasons ago, that Kirby Smart was thought of as a great recruiter, Smart himself acknowledging his recruiting success as being really, really important. But Smart was thought of something less than the best coach in college football, or in a category below the handful of best coaches in college football, because there was this thought that he didn't have the on-field coaching skills to match the recruiting success. And that was true as recently in the eyes of a lot of national media types a couple of years ago. Well, it's amazing how much things have changed in just 24 months. Now, that's what back-to-back national championships will do for you, obviously. But it's amazing how much things have changed because I mentioned we now have 3 lists out there of top coaches in college football. And I'm not asking you to care all that much about any individual guy's opinion on this, but I do think it's a reflection of what the overall taste of the college football commentariat is here at the moment. And you really see how quickly Kirby Smart has now risen the ranks. Bruce Feldman from The Athletic now ranks Kirby Smart as the second best coach in college football, right behind Nick Saban. Stuart Mandel, Feldman's colleague at The Athletic, kind of takes a little bit of a different tack with this. He now ranks Kirby Smart and Nick Saban as kind of 1A and 2A in terms of they're essentially tied as college football's best coach. Brad Crawford from 24/7 Sports, though, takes the next level, and he has now moved Kirby Smart to the top of his overall coaching list, now ranking Smart as the very best coach in college football. It may not surprise you to find out we agree with Crawford around here, and we think that Bruce Feldman's a little slow to acknowledge what's actually going on here, which is that Saban may be the GOAT, greatest of all time, but Kirby Smart is now the greatest at this very moment. And I just think the last 2 seasons of college football bear all that out. You can't dispute what Nick Saban's done over the course of his career. No one's ever been better. But I also don't think you can overlook what's happening right now, where clearly over the course of the last couple of seasons, Smart has shown you an ability to develop and coach during a game that I believe is now equal to the recruiting success that's given him the talent to even be in this conversation. Let's walk through this just a little bit. During the 2021 year, Kirby Smart made a very bold decision. And what else is it that we ask coaches to do more so than make really bold decisions and do so with bravery even when a lot of people think you're making the wrong choice. But that's exactly what Smart dealt with when he decided to move to Stetson Bennett as his quarterback and move JT Daniels to the bench. It was shocking to a lot of UGA fans. It was surprising to a lot of national media types. It was the right choice. The results speak for themselves. And after finally breaking through and winning a national championship, the kind of thing that even guys like Jimbo Fisher have done, one national championship is not evidence of anybody being a great coach necessarily. Larry Coker's got one national championship. There are a lot of kind of random names that have won. But Smart, in the face of some, assuming he might be kind of a flukish one-and-done type guy, replaced 15 players drafted off that 2021 roster and came back and had a 2022 season that was even more dominant than the Dogs were in 2021. They won every single game. They won the SEC championship, something that Georgia had failed to do in 2021, and they won the national championship game 65-7. By the way, more on that coming up here in a moment. Once again, it's evidence that Smart as a coach is every bit the equal of Smart as a recruiter. And what's fun about all of this is that when you look at Nick Saban and Kirby Smart right now, the actual comparison of the two as coaches is actually a little bit easier to do. This is not necessarily an apples to oranges comparison. This is sort of an apples to apples or oranges to oranges type comparison, although let's not make anything involving Georgia orange. Georgia fans don't want that to be certain. But the point I'm trying to make is this, is that Nick Saban has been great. Nick Saban, I believe, is the greatest of all time. And Nick Saban as a coach right now probably still counts in the present tense as great. But let me ask you this, and you have a right to disagree, and if you do, I'd love to hear from you. If some non-Georgia fans are watching or listening right now, I'm sure we will hear from them. Look at the 2023 season. Georgia and Alabama have rosters constructed of a similar level of talent, right? I mean, Alabama still recruits as well as, if not better, this past year's recruiting class, an example, as well as, if not better than Georgia. The overall talent level of the Crimson Tide's high. Now, they've also missed on some guys and poorly developed some guys, and that kind of explains why they've had some of the struggles they've had. But the overall recruiting rankings for Georgia and Alabama are very, very similar, if not a slight edge in favor of the Crimson Tide based on the percentage of former 4- and 5-star players and things like that. Both Georgia and Alabama also have a quarterback competition taking place this spring. Both Georgia and Alabama will also replace quarterbacks who are very, very important to those teams over the course of the last couple of years. So there's a certain even playing field right now with Georgia and Alabama. Forget the fact that Georgia's won the last 2 national championships. Just look at this year moving forward. Do you really think Nick Saban is a better position to make Alabama a national champion in 2023 than Kirby Smart is at Georgia? And if you wanted to make the case for Saban without citing some sort of example from the quite distant past, I'm not quite so sure you could make that case. Whereas in the case of Georgia, over the course of the last 2 seasons, you ask the question of what have you not seen them do? You've seen them replace big-time talent. You've seen them win the former walk-on quarterback. You've seen them upgrade the overall offense and the passing attack to a degree that some folks maybe wouldn't have thought was possible at Georgia, that Kirby Smart wasn't willing to allow to evolve. But over the course of the last couple of seasons, he's certainly done that. I guess you can kind of paint the picture of, well, actually, that's all Todd Monken, and now Todd Monken's gone. We're going to find out that Kirby Smart wasn't that good to begin with. But that becomes a pretty convenient argument, though, given the fact that in 2021 we were led to believe that Georgia only won because of its defense. Now, a year later, some would have you believe that Georgia only won because of a historically good offensive coordinator. It seems like that's sort of a shifting scale of argument depending on what fits in the overall current situation. The point is, side by side, the comparison between Kirby Smart and Nick Saban favors Kirby Smart for the first time. A year ago, I would have told you, one national championship alone was not enough to make Smart better than Saban. But now it's not one national championship. It's 2 straight. Nick Saban's the GOAT, greatest of all time. Kirby Smart, though, is the greatest at this moment. We're hoping that the more these lists come out over the course of the next couple of months, ranking top college football coaches, more folks will echo what Brad Croft from 24/7 Sports showed you, that Kirby Smart ought to be at number 1. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented today by Kroger, and we're happy to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We start even earlier than that on Athens Sports Radio 960. Actually, I'm getting my signals crossed here for a moment. We start at 9:45 on DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app, for our 1st and 15, which we love. We're on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960, the Ref. I love doing that every day. Podcasts, Apple, Spotify, everything else in between. just really happy to have you with us as a part of the program today. And a big thanks to our friends at Kroger for making it all possible. You love what Kroger kind of does for you, including Kroger Chef Jr. My kids love Kroger Chef Jr. They're so excited about that. They both my son and my daughter kind of have a little bit of an interest in kind of getting in the kitchen, making a mess, first of all. That's what they really love doing. But, kind of cooking some stuff and some things like that. So Kroger Chef Jr. is a great chance for you and your kids to kind of learn what the experience in the kitchen is kind of all about. In fact, this month, the menu item to be made is called black bean sauce. This sounds really, really good. It's going to be March 18th at select Kroger locations. It's a 30-minute guided cooking experience where your child's going to get an apron to patch, a chef's hat, a recipe card and box, and some tongs for just $7 per child. So go to KrogerChefJr.com to sign up for that today. The word junior spelled out, Junior. KrogerChefJr.com for more on that. All right, we got Jeff Sentell here coming up. We'll talk some UGA recruiting with him. That'll be a lot of fun. Prior to that, let's go around the DawgHouse. And I want to talk a little bit about something that ESPN wrote the other day, because we just discussed a moment ago, Georgia showed you in 2022 that it could replace a lot of departed stars. There were 15 draft picks off the 2021 team, yet Georgia replaced those guys, won the national championship, didn't skip a beat. And what we've said around here is that because of how emphatically Georgia answered that question about itself in 2021, in 2022, you're not likely to hear as much of that going into the 2023 season of how does Georgia replace this and how does Georgia replace that. And it's almost so under-discussed now, it's almost become, to me, a little bit of an underrated topic. With that in mind, I thought this was interesting, and our buddy Connor Riley wrote about this at DawgNation.com. I thought it was interesting to see ESPN highlight what was Georgia's biggest need to replace from its 2022 national championship team. And the thing that it mentioned, and in face value, it sort of makes sense why it would be mentioned, is Stetson Bennett at quarterback. I want to read this. Tom Van Haren is the writer on this. He says when it comes to Georgia's biggest need to replace, it very well could have been defensive tackle Jalen Carter or any of the defenders departing. He says, but Stetson Bennett guided Georgia's offense to 2 national championships, was a Heisman finalist, throwing for 4,127 yards and 27 touchdowns, and he also ran for 10 more in 2022. That is Tom Van Haren from ESPN on this. And I want to make a small, simple point on this, and then we're going to move on and kind of talk about something else, which is that as Georgia begins a new season in 2023, I think there is this assumption around the excitement about the next quarterback, whether it be, as we talked about yesterday, Carson Beck, or possibly Gunnar Stockton, we mentioned earlier, or possibly Brock Vandagriff, who we also talked plenty about. The excitement about who might be the next quarterback comes with a lot of enthusiasm of, well, this guy can be just as good as Stetson Bennett, or perhaps because of the fact that Bennett was a former walk-on, the fact that really no one saw his success coming necessarily, it would not have been an easy thing to predict. Because of that, I think there's assumption is that Stetson Bennett will be easy to replace, and Beck or Vandagriff or Stockton could step in. They could easily do just as well as Bennett, if not do better, because all of those guys are more highly rated as recruits than Bennett once was. And I got to tell you, I want to caution you on that. There is clearly reason for optimism about the Georgia offense here this upcoming season, but as you hear Van Haren from ESPN lay out, Bennett was a Heisman finalist. Bennett put up gigantic statistical totals last year. Bennett played huge. Orange Bowl, National Championship 2021, Peach Bowl, National Championship 2022. Played darn near perfect, it seemed like, against TCU. This was a guy that gave you huge performances in the biggest games, that gave you a larger statistical profile than you kind of gotten used to seeing from Georgia, the quarterback spot. And replacing him won't be easy. Now, that doesn't mean that I think the Beck or Vandagriff or Stockton's going to be worse than Stetson Bennett was, but being as good as Stetson is not an easy thing to do. So I don't mean to be like a wet blanket on a Friday. I never want to do that. But I would caution you to temper your expectations just a little bit. And for any new quarterback playing for the very first time in a starting role, whoever that guy eventually ends up being, expect a little bit of growing pains, even against an easier schedule that you don't really think anyone's capable of truly challenging Georgia with. That might be the case, but it could still be a situation where the quarterback has to kind of grow into a role there. And I think a little bit over the last couple of years, Stetson Bennett had a way of making all of this look a little easier than it probably was. And his success, not always easy to predict, and in some cases, not always easy to understand for some, yet it was real. It did happen. And matching that in the future, not going to be an easy thing for any of the trio of guys competing to be quarterback. I'd take the words of ESPN seriously on this a bit. worth keeping in mind as Georgia begins spring practice. Now, if you want to know just how successful Bennett was over the course of his time as Georgia quarterback, how reflective that is in the way that he was viewed. I mean, let's go back to about a year or so ago when Stetson Bennett was a clue on Jeopardy, right? You remember this? When Bennett, was famous as the national championship quarterback there for a while and showed up as a Jeopardy clue that day. And Stetson was actually asked about that. It was kind of a funny moment about a year or so ago. Let me give you a reminder of this. Stetson reflecting on his appearance as a clue on the Jeopardy program. Let's go back to last year for that.
According to several social media sources, you were a Jeopardy question tonight.
I got a text earlier.
Did you got that?
I did. I hope they got it right.
The question was, in 2022, quarterback Stetson Bennett led this school to the national title over SEC rival Alabama.
Oh, well, that's
33.
I
didn't have a question. I just wanted
to kind of helping them along through the question. I hope they weren't like, who's the quarterback? Nobody would have gotten that one.
So that gives you an idea of kind of what Bennett's relevance has been like over the course of the last couple of years, but it also gives you a little bit of an indication of just how big of a deal it is to be mentioned on Jeopardy. Stetson Bennett seemed pretty excited about all that. Well, here we are a year later. Once again, the Dogs show up on the game show Jeopardy. You may have seen this. Scott Sinclair tweeted about this, and we obviously wrote about this at DawgNation.com there as well. Once again, Georgia showing up as a clue on the Jeopardy program. The clue itself was this SEC school won the 2023 NCAA football title game in convincing fashion with a 65-7 drubbing of TCU. Poor TCU getting its business put out there on that. But nonetheless, for second straight year, Georgia's national championship earns a little bit of a place in Jeopardy lore there as well. So that's pretty cool. And fun to see Stetson there a year ago. Fun to see the Dogs on there again last night. And great to see Scott Sinclair and others kind of pointing all of that out. So good times around the Dogs indeed. We'll make that around the DawgHouse there as well. And by the way, before we bring on Jeff Sentell, speaking of good times, I want to remind you that you still have a little bit of time to register for your chance to win the really fun exclusive VIP lunch insider giveaway that we're doing with our friends at Marlowe's Tavern. Of course, John Stinchcomb is our Marlowe's Tavern insider each and every week here on DawgNation Daily, and John and I are going to be together on Tuesday, March 21st for a special VIP insider lunch, and you have a chance to be there with us. In fact, we're going to select 4 winners to bring a guest and be a part of this great lunch with us on this particular day. We'll talk some Georgia football. We'll have some chef-inspired food. We'll have a great time, and we want you to be there with us for it. So go to DawgNation.com. Very easy to find the link right at the top of the page. You can click into it. You can register for your chance to win, and you got to do that between now and March 14th. So, we got a couple days left to do this, but go ahead and get in for your chance to win if you have not already. We'll announce the winner on March 15th. The lunch takes place at noon on March 21st at the Marlowe's in Dunwoody. So that is going to be an extraordinary experience, and we're very, very excited to have you with us as a part of it. So good luck to you, your chance to win. Hope you get a chance to have some lunch with you. John Stinchcomb, I know, would love that there as well. DawgNation.com, the place to go to find out more about that. All right, before we're done, speaking of coaching rankings, there was something very funny, and maybe this is sort of funny to me, as it relates to the lousy, stinking Gators in one of those coaching rankings things. We'll kind of share that with you here a little bit later on. We'll talk about some of the SEC coaches and kind of what their outlook is for the upcoming season, including Billy Napier maybe not being on anybody's list, or at least not top of mind the way that maybe some Gators fans wish that he would be. So we'll talk about that. But for now, there is serious business to take care of when it comes to UGA recruiting. Let's cover all of that with Jeff Sentell here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Great to have Jeff Sentell on our program on a Friday. A lot of recruiting news to kick around with him over the course of the next few minutes. And one of the things we talked about briefly yesterday was the decommitment from 2024 running back Tuvani Mizell. And I wanted to start with that, Jeff, with you today, if you don't mind. And one of the things we said yesterday was, the running back that Georgia has in the fold for the upcoming class, Dwight Phillips, because of the speed and things like that, kind of brings a dimension that I don't know that Georgia currently has in its roster, so you like that. But the Mizell departure, what does that make room for in terms of new running back priorities? Give us a little bit of a landscape here when it comes to Georgia running back recruiting here at the moment.
Sure. Hey, Brandon. Good morning, everybody. Brandon, we have this program that shows up every Wednesday. It's called Before the Hedges. One of the things that we've been kind of, coyly saying, or maybe stealthily saying, is whenever whenever we brought up Mizell and Phillips in the same backfield, we just charted history. And we said, you know what, Del McGee usually likes those thunder and lightning backfields where there's not a duplication of skill sets. And we always kind of thought that Phillips and Mizell were the duplication of skill set. Both of these guys are under 200 pounds, speed guys. It's funny, Mizell's ranking, when he committed to Georgia, he was the number 5 running back in the country back in 2022, August of 2022. And yet now he's the number 18 running back in the country, and now he was, prior to his decommitment, the 9th highest rated member of Georgia's 10-person 2024 class, which is still number 1 in the country. And you start putting all these things together, and Brandon, maybe the biggest tea leaf is you didn't see Tovani Mizell at a lot of Georgia's big games. You didn't see him for the Tennessee game. You didn't see him for marquee home games last fall as a running back commitment. You didn't see him in January for the parade. You haven't seen him really touting Georgia on social media a lot. He's been talking about other schools. So we just kind of been doing this a lot of years. We just kind of said, I don't know if that one's going to stick, and then finally it unraveled. And I think what you see what Georgia will now do, which is what they've been doing for the last month or so. In fact, Brandon, even when Dwight Phillips went to Athens back in January and would commit that weekend, he was in town being hosted by Georgia on an unofficial visit at the same time with Chauncey Bowers, current Florida, lousy stinking Gators, I'll use your word, commitment. And this guy is about 215, 220. Brandon, he's running spring track, and he's clocking like 10.7s, 10.8s already. It's a phenomenal time for a back that big. Currently committed to Florida, saying all the right things about Florida, and yet at the same time going to continue to visit and hear what Georgia has to say. I think that's what comes readily to mind when you think about running back and where Georgia moves now after this decommitment news from Tovani Mizell.
I guess there's also Cameron Davis too, the guy from Daugherty who I believe is a Florida State commit. Jared Gibson of IMG Academy. It seems like there are a couple of other names kind of floating around there a little bit too, right?
Yep, those are the best names. So Jared Gibson is the number 1 running back in the country. We're used to seeing Georgia dance and go back and forth with a prospect like that. Jared's actually going to take his official visit to Georgia on that first weekend in June, where Georgia tries to line up all the heavy hitters for the first weekend in June. That's kind of a somewhat growing Georgia official visit tradition by having all the official visits in June, having all the big names in there to try to make it feel like maybe either Oscar night and the red carpet, or try to feel like the Augusta Municipal Airport Masters Week, when everybody just starts lining up and showing up in town. Jared Gibson's going to be there. You did mention Cam Davis first. I think Cam Davis is probably the right name to mention, along with Chauncey Bowens out of Florida, North Palm Beach area, simply because this guy told me recently, there'll be a story up today on DawgNation.com, that one of the schools that will be in it till the end for him is Georgia. Del McGee talks to him and his family about every day. McGee sends messages to his family about every day. We've heard this before. That's what a priority recruit at the running back position feels like and looks like with Del McGee in Georgia. And Cam Davis will give Georgia an official visit as well. He's already said that. So those are the likely suitors, I guess, for Georgia at the running back spot for 2024. The other big thing to know is Cam Davis measured in at the Under Armour Atlanta camp about 210 pounds. He also plays baseball. Brandon, I know you love hearing about 5-star prospects in baseball when it comes to the Dogs.
Sure.
But that's the docket, and that's the dossier file for Cam Davis out of Albany.
Well, speaking of visitors, we're expecting a bunch of recruiting visitors coming in for Georgia here as well, coinciding with the start of spring practice. It sounds like next weekend is going to be pretty robust in terms of some of the names that could be on hand. I know we'll talk more about that as we get closer to next week, but I guess let's go ahead and start the preview of this here as Georgia, dead period over, getting ready to start welcoming folks back in. What's that going to be like here over the course of the next couple of weeks?
Yes, so Georgia wants to have basically something to show these recruits, and they want to be able to show off the start of spring practice. Brandon, I'm just be blunt. Dylan Raiola, expected, could very well be in Athens that weekend. Going to take a look, and here's what he's going to look at, Brandon. He's going to look at that Georgia offense. He's wanting to see it for himself and see, okay, Monken's gone, but is it the same terminology? Is it the same plays? Are those the same concepts that Mike Bobo's going to embrace and what Georgia's going to rep out there on the practice field? That's a positive visual I think that the Raiola family needs to see. Of course, Jeremiah Smith is a hot name now in Georgia football recruiting circles, probably the hottest since he spoke down in Under Armour in Orlando. Nation's #1 receiver. Right now, I'm just going to say he has transcendent talent for the position where, what do I mean by that? Meaning that he would be the #1 receiver in the country for a lot of years. You look at the last 5 or 10 years, Jeremiah Smith would probably be the #1 prospect in that class at wide receiver for at least half of those years. That's how good of a player he is. He's expected to be in town whenever Raiola's in town. He's even told reporters down at the Under Armour in Orlando this past Sunday that he's going to be in a couple of times. He's going to give Georgia an official visit. Of course, he's currently committed to Ohio State, which amplifies the Kilimanjaro level of difficulty here for Georgia, trying to pull and twist a wide receiver commit away from Ohio State.
Yeah, has Brian Hartline ever lost?
Raiola?
Has Brian Hartline ever lost a recruiting battle?
Not likely, especially comes to wide receivers.
Right.
But I'm sure you want our pal Todd Monken to hire him away and be the wide receivers coach at Baltimore. Or also another thing to think about there is there's the intrigue there, Brandon, with Dylan Raiola. Because Raiola and Smith got to know each other a lot on recruiting trips to Ohio State when both were committed to Ohio State last season. He even told reporters, Brandon, that if he goes to Georgia and Raiola goes to Georgia, if they end up signing with Georgia together, that they are very likely to win at least one national championship there. So there's something there. There's buzz. It's certainly going to be a degree of difficulty recruitment, Brandon, for I would say, knowing how much you love to see 5-star quarterbacks and 5-star receivers in red and black, for Georgia to do this in one fell swoop of a recruiting class with the nation's #1 receiver, Jeremiah Smith, and the nation's #1 quarterback, Dylan Raiola, that would be a drop the microphone moment for Georgia offensive recruiting.
It does bring to mind, and everything you just said is absolutely correct. But, it used to be years ago that if a recruit said, hey, I'm going to come to Georgia, I'm going to win a national championship. That used to be like the big statement to make. But now if a recruit says, I'm going to come to Georgia and win a national championship, all of a sudden that brings to mind questions from fans of, well, what's going to go wrong those other years? Because the idea of winning just a national championship over the course of a 3-year period, I don't know that quite excites Georgia fans like it once would have, although certainly Georgia fans would love nothing more than have Jeremiah Smith in the fold. And I don't know that there's a team right now more fun to beat out, Damon Wilson example of this, than Ohio State because of all the whining they do and the pouting that Ryan Day does. It used to be the best team to beat out for a recruit was Alabama. Now it's Ohio State for myriad reasons, just because they flail and whine so much when they don't get their way, which I'd love to see.
Especially, I can feel you. I can think along with you on that, Brandon. Maybe the best thing to do is to beat out Ohio State for an offensive recruit, and maybe to beat out Alabama for a 5-star inside the state of Alabama. And you know what? I'll laugh along with you a little bit on your first comment. Because you know what I thought when what I think now when I read things about recruits saying we'll win a national championship together if we go to Georgia.
Yeah.
Probably more likely to say we're not gonna lose one if we go together and we're going to be in Athens. We're not going to lose a national championship while we're there, because right now those boys in Athens, not only are they playing some pretty good ball, they've got a chokehold on that thing where it's kind of more than likely the way Georgia's trending, where they're going to be in that Final Four of the dance every year.
No, I think you're right about that. And you mentioned Dylan Raiola. I guess the phrase you use is expected to visit next weekend. Jeff, I can't figure out what's going on here with all of this. I mean, obviously, we've always taken a school like USC seriously in this, and Nebraska because of the familial tie. I think you take them seriously on this too. I also believe that Nebraska probably has more access to NIL than the average fan probably realizes. So I take the Huskers pretty seriously in all of this too. There's been a lot of online chatter as of late about Raiola to USC. And I am, you'll notice, calling him Dylan Raiola because that's what you asked me to do, even though I am still somewhat skeptical that's how it's pronounced. But nonetheless, I am calling him Dylan Raiola because that's what you said. But the point here, though, is that, what is really going on with Dylan here at the moment?
So here's what we know, Brandon. Look where he's visited. He's visited USC. He visited USC back when there was an open period. He visited Nebraska because it was a dead period, but he could throw the bones up at the game because it's a family thing. His dad is an All-American there. His uncle is the offensive line coach there. So the Raiola name is very much revered around Lincoln, Nebraska. So he could take these visits. Here's where he hasn't visited yet. Georgia. He hasn't visited Georgia since the Kentucky game back in 2021. That's before Georgia won a single national championship. And that's what he needs to do now. He needs to make an impressionable visit or two to Athens to kind of reinforce everything he's seen and feeling. And remember, he didn't visit Georgia, but he got to see Georgia on the mountaintop at SoFi Stadium when they routed TCU in the national championship game. So I guess there's some good feelings there, some good vibes there. He keeps going out to Huntington Beach in Carolina because that's where his quarterback trainers are at. So he goes out there and just kind of adds in a USC visit while he's out there for training. And to get him in Athens, to get him around some other players that are very strong, that what Georgia's building the class with, and to just watch what Georgia has. I think there's one thing, Brandon, if we can look at the Raiola recruitment or the Raiola path through high school, is he wants to be surrounded by a great situation with great players around him. And I think that's what Georgia offers better than anywhere else in the country.
So let me see if I can ask this, and this may not be a very easy question to answer. That may not be an answer, but so visits USC all the time, online chatter, the kind of online predictions leaning the direction of the Trojans, strong family ties to Nebraska, and yet somehow there has been some UGA chatter. Like, what is the source of the UGA chatter given such tangible evidence tying him to other places?
Well, I think there's connections to the staff. I think there's the recruiting message he hears from Kirby Smart. I think it's the recruiting message he hears from other recruits. I don't know if you followed your social media over the past weekend, but one of the things he did when he was in California, not only did he go to his quarterback trainer, and not only did he visit USC and get the Golden Brick Tour by Lincoln Riley again, but he also hung out with Peyton Woodyard. Peyton Woodyard is a guy that is committed to Georgia in the class. I think he's one of those true anchor ambassadors right now for the 2024 class in Athens. Peyton's actually expected to be in Georgia this weekend for 7-on-7, and also will take a visit to Athens on Monday while he's in the state of Georgia as well. But those two have talked about being roommates together. Those two have talked about how important Raiola would be to the class. Woodyard is now a very outspoken dog on social media about all things Georgia. So I think there's a lot of connections there. You hear this stuff that goes around in the background of him and Jeremiah Smith. Jeremiah Smith maybe perhaps saying a little too much about what's happening with him trying to take tandem visits with Raiola to Georgia. And that kind of lets one to believe that there's a lot of stuff brewing behind the scenes. You could not have been more impressed with what Georgia has done over the last 2 years. I've talked to Raiola and his family. Trust me when I say that Georgia is going to be in the thick of this until the end. And also, Brennan, you hear he's going to just take a lot of visits because the family feels like they did it too prematurely last time with his college choice. So he wants to go around. He wants to kind of have that NFL or NBA free agency tour. Maybe I should just say NIL free agency tour now or whatever. But for him, I think the visit path will probably also include Oregon. You've also heard that when he's going to be in Georgia sometime this month, he also plans to visit Georgia Tech of all places. That's probably a nod to Buster Faulkner and that relationship there. And, Brandon, the things that Raiola will say about Georgia, how much Georgia means to him, how he says go Dogs at the end of interviews every time I speak to him. And then also there is a strong connection to a lot of people that have recruited him for a long time at Georgia, including Kirby Smart. We also have to remember Georgia was his very first offer, and that means a great deal to Raiola and his family.
Listen, I would say that nothing makes you realize how special UGA is like spending a few minutes at Georgia Tech.
pretty much on the mark there.
Let me finish with this, Jeff, if you don't mind. I thought you had a really good piece. Some of this was on video, too. Our good friend Kelly Manziel making an appearance here, too, highlighting Monroe Freeling as a part of a Next Generation series of DawgNation. I'm looking forward to seeing a lot more of these videos, courtesy of our friends at Palo Window in Door of Georgia, of course, reading what you have to write there as well. But, Jeff, to me, Freeling is an important guy to highlight in a situation like this because while I don't expect Monroe to start for Georgia this season unless something doesn't go quite right with one of the expected starters, injury, whatever else, I do think Monroe Freeling is an incredibly important player on this Georgia roster this season. To be completely blunt here, I think if Ernest Green and Amarius Mims are your two tackles, if you're a Georgia fan, you ought to feel really good about that. But the level of tackle depth beyond Green and Mims, the two starters right now, perceived starters, I'm not really quite so sure how well built out all of that is, which means a guy like Freeling who's got, all the talent credentials in the world, having him step in, become a capable player who could step into a game if needed because, let's face it, offensive tackles in the SEC do get injured from time to time. You do need to test your depth at some point. Freeling to me is a really important signee for Georgia in that class of 2023 and potentially a very important member of this roster here this year. So I'll give you a chance to talk about him because I thought that was a very crucial name to begin that next generation preview series with.
Yeah, Brandon, you kind of nailed it. I thought that was definitely intentional to lead off with Freeland, not just because he is a great story, which was what we kind of look for here, but I think Freeling needs to be quickly acclimated to Georgia and be like an emergency understudy role in 2023. But, Brandon, I'll be frank. I expect Georgia, if things go right, and things have tended to go right a lot in Athens recently, if things go right, I think 4 of Georgia's 5 starters on the offensive line this year will be gone. And you got to look at it 2 deep at tackle in 2024. That name better include Monroe Freeling or something went wrong. I mean, you could, this is kind of way too early to do this, but likely starters in 2024 in that way too early depth chart don't have a lot of names. You've got Ernest Green III. You've got Monroe Freeling. You've got a bunch of hybrid guys like a Micah Morris, like an Austin Blasky. You've got even Bo Hughley, who Georgia just signed in 2024. Not a lot of pure tackles, but Georgia's got a lot more guys that seem like they're more better fits at guard, Brandon. But the thought of this, if let's say Georgia's offensive line goes Amarius Mims, Cedric Von Prawn in the middle, you've got Tate Ratledge, you've got Xavier Truss, and then you've got that's kind of what it looks like across the front 4. Most of those guys will be gone. I think the only person that will be returning will be Ernest Green. It would be playing right tackle next year, or this fall, or right tackle or left tackle in 2023. So you got to have a lot of guys. Brennan, Georgia hadn't really hit the bullseye on a lot of tackles in the 2022 and 2023 class, aside from Ernest Green III. So that's why Freeling has to play early. He's got all the size in the world, Brandon. I thought it was really unique and uncommon for a guy that, let's face it, played on a small school level, private school football in South Carolina. His football team maybe had 40 guys on the roster. And then for him to go and be ranked as a top 50-ish overall recruit, and then when he started competing nationally at the All-American games, you saw his ranking skyrocket. He was 6'7", he was 295, he has a 31-inch vertical, he does yoga. He's going to do more yoga than you will on the DawgNation cruise in April, Brandon, during the course of a week. And, I mean, he is a guy that you look at it, he better be a starting tackle at Georgia because that guy looks like a future NFL draft pick.
Jeff, it is really good stuff, and I appreciate you taking the time to do great content like that. We'll look forward to read a bunch from you here over the weekend and the days to come at DawgNation.com. And, of course, chatting with you back here again next Friday as a part of DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger as well.
Take it easy, Brandon. Everybody have a great weekend, and we'll see you guys soon.
Sounds good.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, great stuff from Jeff. I think Monroe Freeling's he comes across as a great dude, and I think he's got a really bright football future ahead of him. And getting him ready to go and be a part of the depth situation of the Georgia offensive line, I think you probably feel really good about your projected starters of the offensive line for Georgia. There could be some growing pains there, but listen, Georgia's potential starters of the offensive line are the envy of almost everybody in college football. But what do you have behind them? What's your next 5 look like? I think Monroe Freeling is definitely supposed to be a part of that, and then eventually making a push to be a starter at some point in time in the near future. But getting him ready to be ready in case he's called upon, that's a big storyline for the Dogs here this season, to be sure. Jeff mentioned the DawgNation Cruise. It'll give me a chance to also remind you that we're cruising around the SEC right now, courtesy of our friends at Royal Caribbean. A lot of y'all know we love these Royal Caribbean cruise vacations, including our good friend Kaylee Manziel I mentioned a moment ago. She's actually on board a Royal Caribbean cruise right now. I'm actually not sure which ship she's on, where she's sailing out of. I'm pretty sure she told me, and now I just don't remember. But when she gets back, we'll find out from her how much she enjoyed it. And, of course, it becomes a great reminder to you that as you're thinking about spring break and you're thinking about summer vacation and all kinds of stuff here in 2023, it is time to get booked up for a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. I also love the meetings we're having here right now because we know we're just outside of a month away from our own DawgNation cruise, second ever cruise with DawgNation, here coming up in just a few days. So we want you to be a part of that there as well. And or for those of you who are a part of it, probably better said, for those of you who are a part of it, we're really excited about being with you for that. Of course, the travel agent that's booked all that for us, our good friend Jessica Slater. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. She's a great travel agent. She helps me book my Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. She can help you book yours as well. She even put a great website together called RoyalDogs.com. That you can kind of find out about all the great things going on with Royal Caribbean, including, by the way, January of 2024, the debut of the Icon of the Seas. That is going to be an amazing thing, setting that standard, new standard when it comes to great cruise vacations. Largest water park at sea and all kinds of fun new entertainment options and really just kind of redefining what a cruise vacation is all about. That's what Icon of the Seas is going to be all about. You'll see it January of 2024. All right, admittedly, this is probably trollish behavior, but I am as God made me. So we are going to make fun of the lousy, stinking Gators here for a moment because I told you about off the top of the show, we have kind of now reached the point of the year where various writers are doing their top coaches rankings. We like stuff like that because anything that's fodder for a great college football argument is fun, no matter who it is, the writer. You know, you may like the writer. You may not even never, ever even heard of the writer. It doesn't really matter who the genesis of a lot of this is. It's just the argument we get to have around it that probably matters. And so one of the things we were referencing is Brad Crawford. Now, we like Brad right now because he's the guy that had Kirby Smart at number 1 on his coaching list. He also did something else that I think is kind of funny. Let me show you this here for a moment. So anybody who's ever done anything like this where you have to rank things, it is very hard to keep up with everything you're supposed to rank. It's not difficult to forget something from time to time. So we certainly have some sympathy here for Brad when you intend to do something you don't remember to do it. But in this particular case, apparently Brad Crawford forgot that Billy Napier at Florida exists. Let me show you a footnote that appeared on his story at 247sports.com. Editor's note. The first edition of this story did not include Florida's Billy Napier. He's been added at number 30 overall, replacing Arkansas coach Sam Pittman. Now, two things here. First of all, poor Sam Pittman. So he was 30th, but because the writer forgot Billy Napier, they didn't move Pittman down to 31. They just took him off the list all the way around. Like, how does that fair to Sam Pittman that he was 30th, but the writer said, oops, I forgot Billy Napier. So now apparently there's only one slot left for the SEC in the sort of formatting of this article, I guess. And so poor Sam Pittman gets kicked off the list. I mean, Sam Pittman's already had a hard enough offseason as it is, lost both his coordinators, a little bit of turmoil with the overall position coaches there too. Then he gets kicked off the list. Now, let me ask you this. Would you rather have Sam Pittman or P.J. Fleck? I'd much rather have yes, sir, than row the boat. Same thing with Kirk Ferentz at Iowa for a number of reasons. Would you rather have Dave Dorn at NC State or Sam Pittman? I don't think it's an easy. That's not a tough one for me. I'll take Sam Pittman. Now, Mike Elko at Duke, that may be a coach climbing the ranks here pretty soon, but as of right now, he's less proven than Sam Pittman is. And Dave Clawson at at Wake Forest comes in at 35. Certainly a good coach, kind of done more with less at the ACC, but it is after all the ACC. So you're telling me that Pittman, after being 30, gets kicked off the list. Now he can't be on the list at all? That doesn't seem fair. But if I'm a Florida fan, I'm very concerned about this. Very concerned about this because, you know, the opposite of love is probably not hate. It's probably indifference. And this sort of shows you like the raging indifference that exists for Billy Napier right now, that someone like Brad Crawford, national writer, 24/7 Sports, it even has the possibility of forgetting that he exists. Like Dan Mullen may not have been very good, but nobody was ever going to forget about him. Jim McElwain, for a lot of the wrong reasons, no fault of Jim's, of course, but nonetheless, people weren't forgetting about Jim McElwain. All of a sudden now, you know, you've got Billy Napier there at Florida, and not only is he not any better than the previous two coaches were, he's also now just less descript. Like, that's a Florida. If I'm a Florida fan, that makes me a little bit nervous right now that the media can even forget who my coach is. You couldn't pick him out of a lineup, kind of the buzz cut haircut, no distinctive personality trait whatsoever. And the ranking of the top coaches, you have to sort of slam him in there at number 30 after initially forgetting him. I don't think anything sums up year one of the Billy Napier era more so than a national writer says, oh yeah, Billy Napier exists. I guess he's like 30th best. like, ladies and gentlemen, that is your Florida Gator football program here right now, which I definitely would say that I enjoy. By the way, speaking of coaches who've kind of fallen on hard times, do you see where Josh Gaddis has gotten a new job? Gaddis has had quite a career turn over the course of the last couple of years. It was just 2 years ago, working with the Michigan Wolverines, that Josh Gaddis was recognized as the nation's top assistant coach. He won the Broyles Award that year as the top assistant coach at Michigan. Michigan got embarrassed against Georgia in the Orange Bowl. Gaddis left to go to Miami. Miami was a total disaster this past year. Gaddis was out at Miami and has now landed as Maryland offensive coordinator, working with Mike Locksley. Now, the Maryland situation is always kind of interesting to me because they always have slightly more talent than you realize. And, they sort of beat the bad teams, lose to the good teams. So maybe Gaddis will find a little bit of success there working with a guy in Locksley that he probably knows pretty well. But a couple of things come to mind here for me on this. First of all, I think one of the most interesting coaches in college football is Mario Cristobal at Miami. And I don't mean interesting for necessarily the right reasons. Cristobal was one of those guys that a couple of years ago sort of looked like the next big thing. He was clearly a good recruiter. He kind of understood the sort of the toughness and physicality required to be a successful coach. He brought way more of that to Oregon than they'd probably ever had before, and way more of that than anybody in the Pac-12 was sort of used to, that he was running against the current of culture in the Pac-12, against the grain a little bit, and the fact that he valued defense and running the football and good offensive line and being tough in a way most of the pillow-soft Pac-12 just would never even be able to recognize, that Cristobal is sort of famous for that. And when you see him doing that, even though the offense was sort of struggling a little bit, I was left to conclude that, wow, Cristobal, good recruiter, values toughness. This might be a really good football coach on the rise. And guess what? Takes the big job at Miami. It's still sort of the same story, though, where once again, you just don't have much offense going on there. They have had a hard time, or I should say that Cristobal, wherever he's worked, has sort of had a hard time cultivating offense. So when you look at how bad they were a year ago, do you blame Josh Gaddis for that, or do you say, once again, new job, same story for Cristobal? He just can't find a way to score points, can't find a way to work with any offensive coordinator, and can't find a way to thrive, much the same way that Joe Moorhead didn't work at Oregon, and Gaddis didn't work this past year, and all of a sudden you're left to conclude Cristobal seemed like a coach on the rise. He seemed like the perfect match to kind of resurrect the glory of the Miami Hurricanes. And yet now you're not quite so sure that's going to be the case, and Miami sort of seems like a pretty big mess. I think Cristobal's very, very interesting, where it could be that he just ain't it, that all of the thought of, hey, maybe he's the next great coach, maybe he's got great success coming his way, maybe he doesn't. And the fact that he's had a hard time matching himself with an offensive coordinator might be proof of that. And I guess we'll leave that for there and say that is cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Except, let me just say this, because this was the other point I wanted to make. Doesn't it stick in your craw just a little bit that a guy like Gaddis, who's done nothing since then, was Broyles Award winner in 2021 over Todd Monken? Because as I said before, like, everybody acts now like Todd Monken is this irreplaceable genius for the Georgia coaching staff, but in 2021, darn near nobody acted like they even knew who he was. A guy like Josh Gaddis gets the award over Monken. Monken didn't really even get a lot of chatter in a discussion like that. It just goes to show you that for a lot of people who question, does Georgia have a right, after this year's national championship, to call themselves overlooked, to say they were doubted, to say that they didn't get enough respect, enough credit? We've always believed that, yeah, there was actually way more of that going on around Georgia the last couple of years than people realize. We talked earlier this week about not winning the Joe Moore Award as the nation's best offensive line. Michigan once again won that 2 years in a row. You can cite the Broyles Award situation here. No one, I believe, ever picked Georgia to go 6-6 or 7-5 the way that Nolan Smith and some other players suggested. But there were certainly plenty of evidence over the course of the last couple of years that people have had a hard time processing just how good Georgia is. Its players, its coaching staff, and everything else included, including how good the top man, Kirby Smart, is, as we addressed off the top of the show. So to me, it is fair to say that Georgia has overcome a lot of doubters and silenced a lot of critics along the way to these last 2 national championships. And that seems like a pretty good way to finish things up this week. And by the way, speaking of finishing things up, how about a big finish presented by our friends at the Finish Long Drink? Of course, we always love going into the weekend in style. And, of course, as you get ready to enjoy yourself this weekend, we hope you'll make the Finish Long Drink a part of your plans. As you do that, we like to highlight some fun with the Finish Long Drink as part of our big finish here on Fridays, including this. I saw this on Twitter. So this is a Finish Long Drink cake. That's like, the old meme about everything being cake. Well, this actually is cake. It's a Finish Long Drink can designed to look like a cake. So Miles Teller, you know him from Top Gun Maverick, is one of the part owners of the Finish Long Drink, and so this cake was made in celebration of his birthday. I thought that was kind of amazing. Maybe I'll get myself a long drink cake here this year. I don't believe you have to be 21 to enjoy that. I believe anybody can have the cake. But nonetheless, it's a cool-looking cake there from our friends at the Finish Long Drink. By the way, I don't think you can buy a long drink cake online, but you can go online and find out where you can buy some Finish Long Drink, whether it be a beverage store, a bar, a restaurant near you. You can enjoy what we've been talking about here on DawgNation Daily for quite some time, whether it be the long drink cranberry or the long drink strong, which is 8.5% alcohol by volume, long drink zero, that's no carbs, no sugar, or the long drink traditional, which you saw there a moment ago if you're watching on video in the blue can. It's got the grapefruit flavor, comes along with a gin kick. It is a lot of fun to enjoy. And you can find out where and how to enjoy it if you'll go to thelongdrink.com. All right, we have a handful of golden shoes to give out today. So what do you say we do that in style to close out our week? Starting with the first one here right now. We'll get ready to acknowledge our first golden shoe winner here for today. Our buddy Ryan Walker, speaking of Nick Saban, who has been doing a lot less winning lately and a lot more whining and crying. And so Ryan Walker says, how about some cheese go along with that wine? He's got Nick Saban in the movie called Crybaby, a Troll Tide production, which is very funny. He says, known to cry over everything, what will make him cry next? That's very funny. That's a movie I wouldn't mind seeing. Ryan Walker will give you a golden shoe for that. How about this from Mike McPherson? We have such talented members of our audience. He says, I've been playing with the laser on some scrap wood, thinking about making a wall hanging all 4 in order by year. So you get all the various national championships. I love the fact they have the new 1942 and 1980 national champions logos, which I love. And Mike doing some great woodworking to show the case, all of that. Mike, very talented, good-looking stuff there. Very impressive. What's that, Michael? I don't know if he's selling those or not, but that's very, very impressive, Mike. You at least get a golden shoe for your effort there on that, because that's beautiful to see. That 42 championship logo is awesome there as well. Our next golden shoe goes to Brian P. Hall, who picked up some coffee, and I guess it's called the Mpemba Blend here, which he says is foreshadowing for the future destiny of what Sam Mpemba may be able to do at Georgia. Brian, enjoy that, and fun to think about what Sam Mpemba might be able to be for these dogs. Good-looking UGA coffee mug going along with that there, too. And then our buddy Army Dog Charlie shares this from, y'all know 3-Year Letterman on Twitter, one of the legends on Twitter. He's made this meme, and I always like these kinds of memes. So you've got the older guy who is Alabama getting in the wheelchair, and he's saying, I used to rule the world. You've got LSU as the daughter and Georgia as the son saying, okay, Dad, as they're getting him into the wheelchair. So that's pretty funny stuff, and maybe probably more fitting than Crimson Tide fans want to acknowledge. And a very funny golden shoe going out to 3-Year Letterman and Army Dog Charlie there on that. By the way, speaking of the lousy, stinking Gators, the national media may forget Billy Napier exists, but we don't forget the cocktail party exists. 232 days from right now, Georgia back in Jacksonville, beating up on Florida again. That is your Gator Hater Countdown, and we will see all of you Monday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. R.S. Andrews, show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. All right, so we're going to get your comments here, and we'll kind of close out the week in style. And hope you're all having a great day. Start looking forward to a great weekend and everything else. I'm going to go to Facebook first today, if you don't mind, and we'll get a bunch of comments, and we'll see how folks are doing. Rainy here where we are. Watch a little Players Championship this weekend, or just the Players, they call it now. Watch a little Players. Georgia baseball, Charleston Southern, SEC basketball tournament rolls on in Nashville. Jeff Ingram reporting that he's in L.A. right now visiting his grandkids. Still raining about like it was January 9th. It rained so hard in L.A. when we were there. Ironically, kind of a desert area, not known for lots of heavy rainfall. Boy, it rained hard when we were there. That's true. Johnny Prescott says, commenting on what we talked about at the top of the show this morning. He says, anyone else hearing the rumor that now that both Boeheim and Coach K are retired, they're starting up a wine and cheese charcuterie service. That's funny. Johnny, that's very funny. Ken Holcomb says, exactly, B.A. Before 2 national titles, Monken was just another journeyman offensive coordinator floating in and out of jobs every couple of years. I'll be surprised if he stays in Baltimore for over 2 years. I do love him for what he did for UGA, though. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Let's see what else is going on here. Let's see what else. On Facebook, a lot of folks having some fun conversation here. Suzanne Mai is asking about a final decision been made by Dylan Raiola or Deuce Robinson. Yeah, I hadn't heard much about Deuce as of late. We talked to Jeff about, was it last week or 2 weeks ago we talked to Jeff about Deuce. I haven't heard much of that lately. The Raiola thing probably goes early summer. I'd say that probably wraps up early summer. Sometime in June, maybe. Kevin Cook says that Pittman will be on the hot seat if things aren't turned around soon. Unfortunately, I think this is probably a pretty big year for Sam. I do, and I say this as someone who openly roots for him to win games. I think the lack of continuity for the first time. Now, he brings his quarterback back, but he's got 2 new coordinators for the first time since becoming Arkansas coach. They have just unfortunately lost some games they should have won. Like they should have beat Texas A&M last year, just for instance, on this, and a little closer than they should have been with Missouri State. So they're going to have to win some games, and in some cases win some games more convincingly. And the SEC is obviously getting more difficult. In the future, you're talking about Arkansas probably playing Texas every year. They're going to be kind of situated in that sort of southwest quadrant of the SEC soon. And so, their schedule's going to get, of course, they always kind of play a tough schedule, so I guess that won't be new for them. But your overall point, I think, really truly stands, which is they're going to have – the fact that Pittman's a favorite son, this is just the cutthroat nature of the SEC. I'm not saying it's fair or unfair or right or wrong. It just is what it is. This is, that's an overused phrase, but this is an accurate use of the phrase. It just sort of is what it is that Pittman's a beloved favorite son in Arkansas. He overachieved mightily in his first few years on the job compared to what certainly Chad Morris was doing prior to that. And yet eventually the goodwill from all that still eventually runs out. And it's just the way that it is. It's just the way that it is. And, Pittman's going to have to win a little bit more to kind of hold on to some of the good grace that he clearly had earned for himself in his first couple of years on the job. Randy Hall, looking forward to another season of high school football coming up. Very excited about that. Be here before you know it. William Camacho looking forward to the chance to go for 3 in 23. William, I am right there with you on that. You better believe that's the case. You better believe. Looking forward to go for 3 in 23. All right, let's go to YouTube here, too, and I'll come back to Facebook in a moment. On YouTube, we'll see how folks are doing over there. TMN says, is Virginia Tech going to join the SEC? Yeah, the ACC dissolution thing is, I think, pretty fascinating to watch. And I guess I'm of the belief that if the SEC had a chance to kind of reach in there and grab teams, it would maybe be like a Virginia or a North Carolina. Certainly, probably North Carolina would be the most attractive team, maybe even more so than a Florida State or a Clemson. But, some of those schools that are in parts of the country where the SEC currently isn't, that might be somewhat attractive. But the one thing I still don't have enough, I think, intelligence to understand is whether or not having more teams in the SEC beyond what they have right now necessarily makes the league more money. And that's kind of the thing sort of holding college football in place as we understand it right now. That there's a little bit of a battle right now over what you call the four corners schools: Utah, Colorado, Arizona State. The Pac-12 and the Big 12 seem to be fighting over them a little bit, because this would be, for both those leagues, a chance to earn the right to still exist. That if the Big 12 could steal the four schools in the Pac-12, as I understand it, that means the Big 12 can just survive, and the Pac-12 probably wouldn't at that point in time. And if the Pac-12 could hold on to those four corner schools, because of the fact they also have relatively respected programs like Washington and Oregon, then they would have maybe more cachet than the Big 12, which is kind of a hodgepodge of sort of middle tier Power 5, newly minted Power 5s like Cincinnati, UCF, and that the future of the Big 12 would be in doubt because they just don't have much of a marquee name in their league anymore. But while you've got the Pac-12 and the Big 12 sort of fighting over these, what I think of as kind of table scraps, Arizona State, Utah, Colorado, the larger schools like Washington and Oregon, and people don't really realize how big of a football program Washington is. It's not as big as Georgia, not even close, but is it one of the 20 biggest football programs, 25 biggest football programs? Might be somewhat close. They've probably recruited better over the years than you realize. Seattle's obviously a big metropolitan area. They're good more often than not. They have sizable fan base. That they're a pretty attractive program for the most part, but they might not quite be attractive enough that the Big Ten wants to take them. Same thing for Oregon there too. Oregon's got Nike, and Oregon's kind of this kind of cool seeming program, but maybe not quite big enough that the Big Ten feels like by adding them into the league, it makes more money for everybody else in the league, the way that they thought it was a no-brainer to do that with USC and UCLA. You follow me on that? And the same thing's kind of true for like Clemson, Florida State. Like, would the football product be good if you added something like that into the SEC? Yeah, it definitely would. But financially, does it make the league more lucrative and demand more TV money? I don't know that it does, especially given the fact that ESPN already controls the ACC media rights deal anyway. Does that mean that Clemson and Florida State are more attractive to the Big Ten, possibly? Maybe that's the case. Let's see what else. DMart42 asked about Andrew Paul. Yeah, we talked about Andrew briefly during our 1st and 15. I don't have anything new on Andrew right now, but my guess is that'll be one of the injury updates that Smart does provide when we hear from him on Tuesday. We're only a couple of days away from hearing Kirby Smart on the subject of football, and Andrew Paul will be one of those names. Let's see what else. So I think Paul Moon and maybe Christy were talking about, I think if I'm following them correctly, they're talking about the Marvin Harrison punt return situation, whatever else. So here's my feeling on punt returns. Nobody asked me, but I'm going to tell you anyway. So if you're a player that can easily get the football another way, then you probably shouldn't return punts. And in the case of Harrison, the Ohio State offense has shown quite capable of getting the ball in his hands through a traditional means. And so therefore, since he gets so many touches on offense, I'm not quite so sure he needs those touches on special teams because he's already getting the football a lot. It almost seems like you're bringing in an injury risk for someone who's already getting a good number of touches anyway. I said the same thing a couple of years ago. It's been more than a couple of years now. It's been 20 years ago when there was some chatter about maybe not Sean Marino should return punts for Georgia. And I remember thinking at the time, hey, great athlete, but this is also a running back. You got to be able to get him the football a lot of ways without having to resort to the special teams thing to be able to do that. Now, kick coverage, stuff like that, I don't have a problem with that. One of the things that's made Georgia is having great athletes, great players commit themselves to being great on special teams. That's one of the things that's made Georgia Georgia. So I don't mind you being on kick coverage, but there's something about being punt returner that to me seems like if you're already getting a lot of touches another way, then why take on that additional risk just to get one more touch through special teams? Army Dog pointing out that Kirby does use number one players, sort of starter level players on special teams, and maybe this is faulty logic, but as I said before, I don't mind you on kick coverage. Sony Michel and all kinds of great players have been on kick coverage for Georgia. I think the kick return thing is probably a little bit different. That if you're getting, like in the case of Harris, I mean, he has a gazillion catches per game. That if you're getting a lot of touches the normal way, I don't know that you need that touch. Now, you may come back and say, well, BA, you're faulty in your logic to assume it's riskier to, field a kick and return it as opposed to cover a kick. That may be true, but that's the way my brain sort of seems like it's working right now. This is a good question. He said, if you had to pick one, which would it be? 50 sacks or 2 1,000-yard pass catchers this season? So I believe that, let me see if I can validate this. I believe that any team that had 50 sacks or any team that had 2,000-yard receivers is probably in the college football playoffs. So to me, and I'm sure there's been a 50-sack team that didn't make it, but to me, either one of those statistical profiles is likely a national championship contender at a very high level. I guess I'd probably take the 2,000-yard receivers just because that's something that Georgia hasn't done. It would also be an emphatic answer to a big question. ESPN says the toughest player for Georgia to replace is Stetson Bennett, new offensive coordinator, looking for breakout at wide receiver. Well, clearly, if you had 2,000-yard pass catchers, you're clearly answering all those concerns in a very emphatic way. Army Dog also celebrating his golden shoe win in here, which he deserves to be able to do. Let me get a few comments here at DawgNation.com there as well. And then we'll kind of take one more trip around the comments after that and get ready to wrap up. All right. Brer Double Dog says that Pittman's such a likable guy that it's hard not to, it's basically hard to root against him. Is the A&M game against Petrino, Sleazy Monk, going to be the do or die moment? Yeah, it could be. That's a very funny way to describe Petrino. I do think that Bobby Petrino as A&M offensive coordinator is a really interesting SEC storyline. And I've kind of lost any of my credibility to say, hey, watch out for Texas A&M this year. But I do think that Petrino could make them better. I really do. Roger W. says, should Ladd be returning punts? I guess based on what I said earlier, that's a fair question. But it's kind of funny to me how little it seems like the kick return stuff matters for Georgia, right? I mean, it's like Georgia's got all these great athletes. I did a research thing on this one time about how part of the reason why there's fewer, I guess, big explosive punt returns for Georgia is because there's just fewer of those in the game. It wasn't that long ago that you had a lot more kind of explosive punt returns you kind of have now. But I guess based on what I said before, that's a fair question. Randy Hall says, have I seen the building plans for the new Buford Stadium? I have not, but I'm sure it's massive. I'm sure it is. That Buford campus is amazing. It really is. And, a lot of these city system campuses are amazing. I would say right now, what I would guess that Buford's going to probably build is something that kind of rivals what, Carrollton, Marietta, places like that. They're also city systems. I'd probably say Carrollton, Marietta, probably the nicest stadiums. You've got the McEachern thing, which is a little bit of an outlier because of their endowment. But in terms of like the sort of traditional means of constructing a stadium, Carrollton, Marietta, those are probably the nicest stadiums we travel to regularly. There's no telling what Buford's going to build to kind of rival that. Rambo says, you mean the University of Buford? Yeah, it kind of feels that way. It is a sprawling campus like a college. It really is. Let's see what else. Brooksy says, did anybody notice that Jeff's hair in that photo is like Brandon's, almost perfect? Yet he has wavy locks when live. Yeah, the other day we were doing this thing, and I think that Jeff kind of just sort of woke up and showed up. And we're talking about who's taller between Jeff and me. And Kaylee Mansell's with us. She said Jeff is taller than me, which you very well might be. But I was giving him a hard time because I don't think he had combed his hair that morning. It was a little bit puffy. It was kind of sticking up. And I was trying to mash his hair down so I could be taller than he was. Let's see what else. Brooksy says, going back to the coaches comparison, I think that Lincoln Riley, due to his transfer portal skills and some of the newfangled things that he's embraced, like NIL, might make him better than Nick Saban. I gotta see Lincoln Riley produce something on defense at some point in time. It just has never happened. That was one of the worst defenses, of any kind of major sort of top 25 level team. USC had arguably the worst defense of anybody last year. And while I have been as impressed with anyone as with Riley's, ability to construct offensive football, at a certain point in time, you got to do it on both sides of the ball. You just do. And, you can run out west and, sort of hide from the kind of physical football that gets played in this part of the country. But eventually, if you want to win a national championship, if you want to compete for championships, you've got to compete with programs that do it on both sides of the ball. Let's see what else. Which, by the way, so when you look at some of these top coaches lists, the other thing that kind of comes to mind for me a little bit is, so we know the debate for the best coach is Saban and Kirby. We know that's true. But if I were to ask you, go to bat for somebody else being a great coach. This is a weird time for me in college football where, Kirby's clearly shown himself to be a great coach. Nick Saban obviously has been a great coach, and I think probably still is in the ranks of that. Even though I kind of jokingly said opposite earlier, I still give Dabo Swinney a chance to be in this discussion. 2 national championships mean something to me. But even if you stipulate those guys, who right now in college football would you go to bat for and say, I truly believe this guy's a great coach, whether it be great up-and-coming coach or great established coach? I feel like we have fewer of those in college football than we've ever had before. And like the guy that shows up near the top in a lot of these lists is Jim Harbaugh. And I think that Harbaugh has reestablished himself as a top-tier coach again. But, they just lost to TCU in the playoff. They got embarrassed by Georgia last year. That's your great coach. But, boy, there's some holes in that resume big time. Brian Kelly is a guy here who I think has a chance to really show that he is truly a great coach. But, he left Notre Dame after getting embarrassed in the playoffs multiple times and showing that he really wasn't at that national championship level. Greater degree of talent at LSU, maybe that changes. But once again, Kelly in this discussion of, well, that's one of your great coaches, once again, there sort of seems to be some holes in that resume too. Sometimes I think about, let's say that Kirby Smart decided tomorrow, hey, I've got 2 national championships. I don't want to do this anymore. Would you have a name you would even want to hire? Like, I'm not even sure I have a name I'd want to hire. I guess I'd probably just give it to a guy that's already on the staff. Like, I'm not even so sure right now. And this is a weird time because typically in college football, it seems like there's a handful of names. You're like, yeah, that'd be my guy, or that'd be this, that'd be, I just don't even really know who that is. If Kirby Smart woke up tomorrow and said, I'm not going to coach at Georgia anymore, I'm just tired, I want a break. And if we said, okay, well, you've got to hire a current head coach somewhere to be the coach at Georgia, I think my guy might be Luke Fickell, the guy that just got hired at Wisconsin from Cincinnati. I think that might be my guy. And I'm not saying that because I know he's great, but I just sort of feel like I don't see a lot to recommend about a lot of the other guys who are out there. Barry Watkins says Lanning or Schumann. I'd be fine with that. I really would. I really would. But my point is not – I think you're right. But my point is I'm amazed at how few established coaches kind of rise to the level of being great right now. It seems like we have fewer great coaches in college football we've ever had before, I think, anyway. And if you really got serious about this, once again, if this is a real serious conversation, after 1 year of head coaching experience, would Dan Lanning really be my pick? Maybe, but I don't know for sure. I don't know for sure. He might be, but I don't know for sure. I think that Lanning has a chance to be a great coach, but that's still only 1 year of head coaching experience. Frank Patterson says Del McGee be the obvious choice for our next head coach. I think he might be a good one. All right, let's get final comments. Christy says Dabo's going to win a golden shoe. Paul Moon says that Clemson's always appealing to recruits. Dabo won't have a problem getting talent, but the way he goes about recruiting is weird. Yeah, I think, the one thing that Dabo, I think, has made a mistake with is that he has kind of turned up his nose at some avenues for pursuing talent. And I just don't think, if you want to really be at the highest level, I just don't think you can do that. And listen, there's a part of me that wishes college football was a little bit more like Dabo makes it, where, hey, if Dabo extends that scholarship offer to you, you can go to Clemson. Whereas there are a lot of programs that's not necessarily the case, where you may get the scholarship offer, but over the course of time, maybe that program changes its mind about you. That's just a real fact of how the business gets done in college football. In the case of Dabo Swinney and Clemson, I don't think we see a lot of examples of that. They're pretty judicious with the offers they make, and they stick by the offers when they make them. But there's no free lunch. That if you're going to be that magnanimous about your scholarship offers, eventually your roster's going to suffer because of it. And every now and then, Clemson sort of seems to have one of those Mark Richt things going on where they got like 70 guys in scholarship, and that's just not a full roster. And it's hard to compete with teams who have 85 guys who they used every mechanism imaginable to get the most talented players they could get. If you don't have Deshaun Watson or Trevor Lawrence at quarterback, your roster holes start to really show up in a glaring fashion. And that's unfortunately what Dabo's kind of dealt with the last couple of years. Let's see what else. Is it Jay Shipe's birthday? Frank Patterson says that. He says he partied too hard and isn't here, but you should wish him a happy birthday in case he watches the show when he wakes up. Well, Jay, happy birthday to you. Hope you enjoy it. Sounds like you already have, but we hope it is a wonderful day for you. So happy birthday, Jay Shipes. Happy birthday indeed, for sure. Let us see what else. All right, final comments. We got to go. So we don't have time to get into this right now, but take this away from who would you want replacing Kirby Smart. Put this back in the realm of, like, do you see another great coach in college football? I mean, Ryan Day, who's never won anything, he can't be a great coach. That is not a great coach. Plus, talk about in-game coaching decisions. You know, part of the thing that allowed Kirby to outlast Ohio State in the Peach Bowl was Kirby just made better coaching decisions than Day did. Ryan Day's not a great coach. He's not. Most of you would probably agree. Harbaugh comes close, but as I said before, you know, poor performances in big games against teams not named Ohio State. Lincoln Riley's teams play no defense at all. Oklahoma, USC, you can change the location, results stay the same. I don't remember a time in which I felt like there were fewer bona fide great coaches in college football. And admittedly, one of the guys I would have had on my list a couple of years ago would have been Jimbo Fisher. And I'm not being funny. I'm being serious. Jimbo would have been one of my guys. And Jimbo has performed so poorly over the course of the last couple of years, I think you got to clearly take him off that list. And some of y'all would have said that at the time. You've turned out to be right. It appears I was wrong. But that's an example of the list of guys who are truly great. You know what you're going to get from them year in, year out. The list of college football coaches that meet that criteria right now, I don't know that it's ever been shorter. Eric Devornsey and Pete Williams on the subject of Deion Sanders. Devornsey mentioning him because of the recruiting abilities. Pete saying, I really like Deion and miss him as a player, but for head coach, he's a mistake. I give Deion, over the course of the long term, a pretty good chance to be successful. I give him over the short term very little chance to meet what seems to be kind of an out-of-control level of expectation. Like, there's clearly a media strategy out there of take a guy that generates a lot of clicks and have your hottest take be about this guy. That's why LeBron is always being talked about on, like, Skip Bayless and Stephen A. and stuff like that. Cowboys, kind of the same way. If you'll notice, on both the FS1 show and the ESPN show around the NFL talk, the hottest takes are generally generated around the Cowboys because that's the team that has the biggest following. There's a little bit of that in the college football media world now as it relates to Deion Sanders in Colorado. Deion is a very big story in terms of, hey, getting a shot to be the Power Five. He's already this famous guy. They bring in a lot of transfers. Shedeur Sanders is obviously there. Travis Hunter's obviously there. But Colorado will be lucky to win 4 games. They just will. Maybe they win 5. But that's still a losing record. That the odds of Deion being anywhere near as good this year as some people think he can be, I would put those at a pretty remote chance. But I think that Deion has a very interesting blend of coolness, but also common sense. Like, Deion kind of comes across with a little bit of like a blue collar vibe. Like, for someone who's like so flashy and dynamic, he also has a little bit of a blue collar vibe there as well. He kind of blends those two things kind of interestingly. That I think that Deion could be a really pivotal coach. I think that Deion could really have a big mark on the coaching ranks. I don't think it's going to happen quickly because it doesn't really typically happen quickly for anybody. So in the short term, I don't guess Colorado's going to be very good this year. But if he can stick out, if they will remain patient with him for 4 or 5 years, something like that, over the course of that period of time, I think he could be probably a very good coach. Johnny Prescott says it's inappropriate to pour a finished long drink on St. Patrick's Day if I use a drop of green food coloring. No, I'd say you're all fair on that. Wayne Kirkland says he thinks that Deion will be 7-5 this season. I mean, that Colorado team, I know they have 50 new players. That Colorado team was really bad last year. Wayne, I'm not sure I see 7 wins there this year. Could be wrong, though. Could be wrong. All right, let's get ready to go. Final comments on every comment section. Rambo says maybe one of Kirby's kids will ascend to the throne and be Georgia coach when Kirby's finally said and done. That's pretty good. Charles Womack mentioning Sonny Dykes. Yes, Sonny Dykes could be an up-and-coming coach. I mean, 65-7 notwithstanding, he could be an up-and-coming coach. Charles, you may be right about that. Charles also says that Clemson plans to up its NIL game. The hard thing is you got to be able to raise the money. And this is where, you can talk big about upping the NIL game, being willing to pay it, but you also got to have the ability to raise it. And that's the thing that people just don't talk enough about. Clemson is not, South Carolina is a small state. Clemson shares it with the University of South Carolina. The alumni base for Clemson is just not that large. And so you're going to have to try to generate a bunch of NIL funds from a smaller pool of people than certainly a lot of these Big Ten schools have at their disposal. So that'll be interesting to watch and see how that goes. Charles, thanks for bringing that to our attention. Back on YouTube for the final time. Let's see what else. Paul Moon says he thinks that Brian Kelly is a decent, good, but not great coach. I wouldn't say great yet, but I think he could take – he's one of the guys I would say has a chance to take that step, depending on how he performs at LSU. Mark Woodman C. says we will not hear about Deuce Robinson until the baseball draft. Yeah, I'm kind of out of sight, out of mind on him for the moment, and if something happens to change that, I guess I'll be pleasantly surprised. Christy checking out. Christy, good to have you here as always. Foster Moss on the subject of Chip Kelly. Yeah, I don't know that I got Kelly in that category right now either. All right, we're going to get ready to go. Thanks all of you for being here. Y'all have a great weekend. Check out our friends at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution online, ajc.com. All kinds of stuff going on there. You can follow, Braves putting the finishing touches on spring training. Falcons getting ready for the NFL draft. Also, a very weird look. Not a weird look. The look is normal. But a look at the very weird way in which Jim Boeheim's career comes to an end at Syracuse. And here's the thing I'll tell you. I'm going to try to work until I'm 100 years old. Our fearless leader, B.J. Sweeney. You have heard us talk about B.J. before. B.J.'s a Syracuse fan. But I'm going to try to work until I'm 100 years old. I'm going to hold on. I'll be the guy that they're having the meetings about how do we gently let him know that it's time for him to step down. I promise you, I will, whatever job I'm doing in this media world 50 years from now, I am going to try to do it way too long. And, people are going to be on the internet, social media saying, the game's passed him by or it's time to step down. I'm going to do this as long as I possibly can. So I have sympathy for Jim Boeheim. But, boy, not a very dignified conclusion to his career there at Syracuse, and you do truly hate to see it. You hate to see it. So you can read more about that at ajc.com. Also, bunch of stuff going on this weekend, including somebody mentioned St. Patrick's Day. Get the St. Patrick's Parade and stuff coming up. So you can read more about that online, ajc.com there as well. Also, check out R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Guess what? This is how quickly things can change here in the Atlanta area. It's going to be 30 degrees tonight. That means your heat's back on. That means some of you are like, ooh, does my heating system even work? Well, go ahead and get that thing tuned back up to a factory fresh specs. That heating system that can kind of keep you nice and toasty and warm when it gets cold outside, and it is going to be. Find out more about that online at rsandrews.com. Have a great weekend. Back here Monday, DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Spring practice week will be on hand. We'll do it then, and we'll see you then right here on DawgNation Daily.